Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie, and my dear friend Jonathan Fremantle. I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third-generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth-generation art professional, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, and partly raised in Australia, lived and worked in London and Paris, and 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art as life goes on. And without further ado, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, Jonathan Fremantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense, and have been more making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg, where I had Hazard Gallery, and that was the context that I met Valerie about 10, 12 years ago, and just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. And that conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation, and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it usually goes anywhere and everywhere, but somehow we always come back to art, and
Yeah,
because it is the love that loves us back. Thank you very
right.
much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing the journey. Today, we wanted to talk about the young Pope, partly because
Yeah.
this is how ad hoc this is going to be, because it seemed like a good idea at the time. I watched the show, I think in 2 sittings. I was kind of seduced by the show, partly for me, and you will kick into it because I mean both of us are very familiar with the setting. The show is set almost entirely in Rome, in the Vatican, and we're thrust in the very first episode, regardless of the action, into the Sistine Chapel, and one of the very first, I think, in the first episode, the young Pope, played by Jude Law, is has a conversation in front of the Pietà, and for me it was kind of a very interesting moment because the Pietà plays a very special role in my
Yeah, and mine.
art
Yeah.
journey, like immediately, because it was my very first knockout art experience. And I think we've often discussed that notion, is that something that reminds you so profoundly, and knocks you out very, very unexpectedly. And I remember the experience, and I was about 11 and a half, and we were visiting, we're doing a tour of the Vatican. I mean, it's a very long story. We were living in Italy as stateless people, exiting the Soviet Union, and one of the trips, we did a trip to Rome, and the tour guide, in introducing the Pietà, which was at the time, and I don't know if it still is, behind bulletproof glass, and he was explaining that the reason it was behind bulletproof glass was because there was a German tourist who became so overwhelmed by...
I think he was Australian, actually.
What's that?
I think he was an Australian tourist,
I was in
actually.
Australia. Well, there was a tourist who was so overwhelmed that he decided to shoot at the statue. And I remember looking at the statue as a child, and I started to swoon. I started to faint, and my mother caught me. And at the time, as I was fainting, I was very clear that I understood exactly why the guy wanted to shoot at the statue, because it was so overpowering and unexpectedly so. And it was the first time that I had like a very physical reaction to an artwork. And that kind of was and it's kind of a touchstone experience for me in kind of in being in the art world and being part of this, or the world being seen through art, because this is my physical reality. And I know, like, and I mean, so, and in a way, the Renaissance, for a lot of us who were trained in the European kind of canon, the Renaissance plays that kind of pivotal role in our visual reception of everything. And the young Pope is very much a testament to that kind of reality. Yeah. So
It's definitely it's a sort of love. One of the things I loved about the film, the series, I'd come to his work through his films, the La Gran Bellezza, The Great Beauty, and then another film he did called, was it called Truth? But the Great Beauty was a love letter to Rome in a way that I hadn't seen any contemporary filmmaker using color and a sort of visual language of love. You know, it's such a clear kind of seductive spiritual understanding of what makes a kind of magical moment. And so the young Pope, I came in as a fan already, but there was something other with the young Pope, and I think partly just because of this unparalleled access to the Vatican. You know, these spaces, like, you know, there's scenes with Jude Law, who plays the Pope, this young American upstart who becomes the Pope, who as we discover through the episodes, has had this epiphany experience where he's seen as a saint, you know, so he's a kind of otherworldly being in a way. And the Vatican, my experience of it was, on the one hand, ecstatic too, you know, experiencing the Pieta for the first time was like, I just wept, you know, like my two sons were with me and I wept. But then you see the other side, which is the sort of the structure of the Vatican and the almost mellifluous kind of creepy, sinister, powerful corridors of power element of the place. You know, the way you access the Sistine Chapel is they take you on this long journey through every corridor possible, and you see papal rings and looted treasure and gold and more gold. By the time you arrive at the Sistine Chapel, it's like you've had too many chocolates. You know, it's so intense. And perhaps one of the most powerful things about the Pieta and the Sistine Chapel is Michelangelo's genius in being able to cut through all of that kind of rhetoric as a visual rhetoric, and make these artworks that take you straight to the sort of divine source. You know, you just fall still, you know. And the film or the series does that in a way that's surprising, because we're seeing these spaces without any people. So it's this incredible behind the curtain, visual, dramatic, almost like secret look into that realm. And there's obviously a lot of love in it. And he wouldn't have been able to make that film without the participation of the Vatican. And yet he's told a story that's kind of part critique and part love story. It's incredible.
But I'm thinking about actually the choice of color and the, you know, and tones are so precisely, and the precision with which the cinematography and the calibration of color is so precise to make everything you know, and seduces and creates a parallel reality which is both entirely contemporary and makes every miracle entirely believable, right? And that's what I found really extraordinary. You all of a sudden, you understand how in that environment all of these things become possible. And you know,
those kind of surreal, miraculous visual metaphors, like the kangaroo, you know, that's hopping, that's a gift of the people of Australia, and he releases this kangaroo into the grounds of the Vatican, and every now and then the kangaroo appears, almost like, is it a real kangaroo or is this an apparition? It's so out of place.
Kangaroo, it's definitely like to anyone who grew up in Australia, not a real no kangaroo harmed in the making of that film. I just can't. It's a stuffed animal, but it is literally, that kind of a symbolic apparition
Yeah.
of an animal that doesn't belong. It's almost, and the kangaroo is probably like him. He is somebody who is completely from another world. He's a new world creature in that old world, and they connect on that level. But I think
Yeah.
to get back to Michelangelo, you're right, because he introduces the free air, like the fresh space that is faith inside of this entirely casuitous and bureaucratic red tape. But somehow the synthesis, there's almost like a necessary synthesis between the two, is that in a way that feels that we have lost in contemporary context a religion that makes faith imperative or necessary, whereas religion and faith have become so separated in
Sure. Yes,
in
the
practice.
religion has, I mean, there's something about, for example, the Pieta, the way St. Peter's is this building which is entirely made of marble, almost entire. It seems like it is. And it's like every imaginable color of marble possible is thrown at this building, this vast, vast cathedral. And you walk in and you're astonished by the scale and the majesty of it, but it's almost overwhelming, and to a point where it's almost too much. And then just to the right, as you enter, is this white marble sculpture. I think it's the only white marble. Maybe it felt like it was, which feels quite small and humble, and yet in its context, the Pieta is like a portal. It's without this huge act of faith, this massive building, perhaps that small masterpiece wouldn't have the same impact. The two work together.
To me, it always presents as gigantic, because it is like the Pieta is gigantic because it is so large in itself, because it has way more impact than anything in there.
Yeah. But scale doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, it's bigger than the whole of the Vatican, that sculpture.
No, easily. Although weirdly, the series talks about the Venus of, what is it? There's that
Yes, the,
Julius
the
story.
original fertility figure. Yeah, I like that actually, because I like the way that that it kind of suggested a kind of pre-Christian faith. So there's this older um, object of devotion sitting in the office with him the whole time, and then there are these men who are kind of stuffy church leaders of the church getting freaked out by this sculpture of a pregnant woman.
No, and I think it's really, in some ways, speaks to our idea of to anyone who lives art. It's this is very much a film about or like a story about a visual experience and the magic of manifesting visually or seeing the world visually, because even the idea of miracles, they have to be seen, right? And how art presents itself as a kind of a miracle that is delivered to us. And but also, in a way, and it's interesting because Jude Law is seen as an arch conservative reactionary, and the thesis, to my mind, of the series is the fact that having is a defense of standing up for principle, and looking at a truth and believing in a truth at a time in history when everything is been made entirely relative. And I think, it really appealed to me from a perspective of art as well, because, as I always talk about the idea of judgment, and, in the art world, we've ceded so much authority to everything and everyone, where we've made it almost impossible to believe in merit, in quality, in accomplishment. And then you go to the origin and you go to the Pietà, which gives which knocks you out. And I challenge anyone not to be knocked out by the pietà, because like ultimately I can't, like I have to weigh it on like entirely on par with Rothko, but Rothko takes probably even like some more excess, or requires a little more excess. I don't, I haven't thought this through.
Yeah, it probably does, although
Not to me,
yeah.
but
I
to
not to me. I think maybe with Michelangelo, that one of the miracles of his work is that it's a language that we know. It's like Jesus Christ dead in the arms of his mother, Virgin Mary. We sort of have that language. And one of its great geniuses is that it transports you through that. And yet you feel at the same time that's a mother. I remember that's what hit me when I first saw it, was this was an actual mother holding the body of her dead son. It felt so human. And yet it was like alien, in the most transcendental way. And the film was definitely, the series was definitely trying to look at that, his relationship with his lost mother, and that yearning for a kind of spiritual home, whether that comes through his devotion to his Christian faith. But he's the whole time he's kind of doubting that in a way that's really exciting. And he's also stepping back from the sort of ego limelight. He doesn't want his own image to be seen. And yet he's like, there's images of him in the shower naked, and he's working out. So there's this beautiful kind of dichotomy where he's working on himself, but he doesn't want his image to be released. He's aware of the power that comes through projecting something bigger than your own ego.
And isn't that what we're struggling with in the art world today? The fact that artists are confronted with that very idea, where they feel the pressure to oversell their ego, when in fact is what they do and what they can represent through their work. So there's very interesting parallels to just the celebrity culture that everyone is seduced by, and overexposure that we're all kind of been convinced that we must pursue, being overexposed. And it's so kind of, it is very, very seductively archaic, what the position that he's presenting. But really, and I'm just thinking, well, should I be convinced by this fairly reactionary position? Because like he advocates for like profound intolerance, and you can sort of easily see Inquisition, coming out of it, right?
Yeah, it's hardcore. Yeah.
But at the same time, also have the examples of the people who are supposed to be more compassionate or more tolerant of what you call sin, right? Ending up in like dire straits and, fucking up things more profoundly and more pervasively, which is also very convincing as well. Like to what stage, appeasement of folly is, should
and
be.
the kind of lack of discipline. I mean, there was a bit of a kind of counter current, because he starts very, you think he's going to be one thing, and then he comes out as he starts to express himself as this young pope. You realize he's incredibly conservative, and he's everything that you would think the church shouldn't be doing now. He's
anti-gay,
he's anti-abortion, etc., etc. He's big on, you are a sinner. And yet, in a way, and that's a really powerful device for the film, because you straight into a much more challenging situation, because you're seduced by the beauty of this thing, and then when he speaks, you're not seduced by that at all. You think, oh, that doesn't work. And where he arrives towards the end, the last couple of episodes, particularly with Gutierrez, the guy he sends to go and catch
the alcoholic,
the alcoholic gay priest who that journey towards, it's by no means a full shift in his attitude, but you feel like he's coming into a much more authentic recovery and discovery of love. You know, it's not a diplomatic or a platitude or a kind of a woke statement. He's actually finding that within himself, and it's pretty ambiguous. I mean, it doesn't give you a kind of money shot at the end where there's this full shift, but you feel that there's some kind of change going on, and it's subtle enough for you to make sure that it feels genuine, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, to me, it really just the whole experience of the show presented that kind of idea of where art works best when it actually does not imitate life. It's the truest to life. It presents the trueness of the art is in fact in not imitating life, right? In being itself, because there's nothing also in the way that there's like the dialogue I thought was just brilliant because it was completely not lifelike. You know, everyone was speaking in poetic metaphor, extremely and to insist on that, it's I mean, it reminded me of an interview that Jean Genet did, where the interviewer was saying, why is it that all of you write books about people who are living in like who are criminals and the underclasses, and yet give them very poetic prose. And he said, well, isn't their life hard enough already? Is like
Sure.
there's no real merit in presenting life as life because we already know it that way, and it's actually through a representation is to present it as art, because you're not you're playing within the confines of the fact that this is not real, and what it does has its own reality and it has its own rules of behaving. And I thought like the series performed, really.
Do you not think there was a point where I was watching it thinking, he starts the opening before the film even begins. Each episode begins with Maurizio Cattian's Pope with the meteorite hitting him, that sculpture. And that's you would think that would be the ultimate sacrilege. If certainly that sculpture's it's Pope John Paul the second Polish one. And it's a great sort of iconoclastic artwork, and it begins with that. And it's in the same way as like Goya's paintings of the royal family are very beautiful. And they're also incredibly sort of comical. They're like parody, and you wonder how he got away with telling such an accurate truth. And I think the way he did it was, well, he could paint, so the armor looked good and the belts were shiny and the horses looked magnificent. But there was also an element of love, so the critique was contained within love. So it's a sort of combination of the two that probably allowed this film to be made, and I wonder if the Vatican even realize how much he's got under the skin of what's right and wrong about religion and Catholicism and art and, love.
Well, considering how, I mean, I think there's still a huge deal of respect, because you walk away from the series. I mean, and, I have to we're thinking about the current controversy with the opening ceremony of the Olympics, right? Sure. Misreading, and the organizers thought they were presenting a feast of Dionysius and everyone else saw something else. Right? This is when art history goes desperately wrong, whereas in The Young Pope, they went, exquisitely right, because
they really nailed it, because it was a portrait of the most beautiful aspects of religion, Catholic faith, and at the same time a survey of everything that's wrong, in the same stroke. And it allowed enough space for this sort of unknown. What keeps you going back to the search for the epiphany or that kind of divine experience is what you don't know yet. There's what you feel perhaps, or some kind of resonance, but it's not something you can touch, And the film and the way he painted with color and light, and the music was spectacular. It was very, very tender,
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, the interesting thing is that we begin with the, the cardinals being extremely cynical, right? And none of them believe, like you believe, like they present as people who don't believe in God, like essentially, and they're the most cynical of the cynical, and they're the politician.
Yeah,
And by the end of it, they're all true
they're
believers.
all there.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
extraordinary. It is
Very, very beautifully cast. There was a scene near the end where the American priest is dying. What was
Spencer.
the young Pope's sort of
Spencer.
father figure. That's it. And they're all sort of standing around his deathbed, and these faces. I mean, they're the characters that he's cast for this film. They're like. I mean, actually, there was a scene where all the
Yeah,
previous popes arrive in kind of vision, and
yeah,
he's
yeah,
painting the characters are all as if they were painted by Titian
yeah, yeah.
and the many painters. He's referring to art history uh, almost in every element of the film, I would have thought.
No, but also because, the Vatican was, the papal guard, the Swiss Guard uniforms were designed by Michelangelo. There is, it's so immersed with art
Yeah.
history that like it's just a treat, and the sort of the side story of it's everything is really terrifically
Mm.
thought out,
Yeah.
and this is, this is done at a time when art history is in a lot of ways at an all-time sort of low in terms of regard
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
contemporary art. And this is
Mm.
where we kind of emerge as the diehard believers in
I think so. We're definitely that, but the film like this maybe is a kind of almost like what's the word? A kind of missionary work, towards looking at the world in that way. It's such a loving portrayal of the beauty. Even Jude Law's the papal outfits. I'm sure they're all accurate,
oh
but you feel
100%.
like each time, the white with the little red shoes, or the scene where he's meeting the Russian Orthodox head of the
Yeah.
Russian Orthodox Church, and he's got this huge kind of cape thing, you know.
Okay. No,
Um,
it's all so, but I think this is in a way where Italians are privileged. I mean, they do know it, right? You mean, whenever you
that's
talk
advantage,
that
yeah.
they're just, this is their living reality that they've
Yeah.
exported to the world. And and I was just gonna say, I remember, the first time I mentioned the young pope to you, I was saying that how essentially Catholic our aesthetics
Yeah.
are. And I remember being also around 12 or 13, and having, like having been painting since the age of 5, I started, and studying art history. I started planning my very first crucifixion, and fully aware that I'm a Jewish child. But I thought that in order to be
What you
an
do. Yeah.
artist, this is what you do. And I started preparing sketches at the age of 12 for my very first crucifixion. And it was like, because and then I was reading something, someone said that that's not necessary, and it just seemed, why isn't it like, but of course it is because every single artist that I ever
Had to
studied
tackle one. Yeah.
that's what they did, and I wonder whatever happened to those sketches, because at a certain point I was like, how is it I don't have to do this is, but it was very much on the agenda. Okay. And then I thought, well, what do I do with this? Like, I didn't take the next step of thinking, well, where should it go?
Sure. When's the show?
And when is the show? No, look, for a 12-year-old, the show was not yet there, but it was, planned. Did you ever plan do you have, I mean, I know
Uh,
you've had works.
I had, because my dad was an artist, is an artist. So I guess I had the kind of idea of showing maybe a bit younger. Although I don't think I ever planned shows. I definitely kind of, maybe I did. I actually can't remember. I know that my sons did, because when they started seeing me selling work, my youngest son, Leonardo, um, he he decided he wanted to make some money. So he said, I'll be an artist too. And he did like 10 drawings. And he made them 100 rand each. And obviously everyone in the family bought the drawings.
So it was an
So his idea of
outrageous
being an
success.
artist super easy. You just do shit and sell it. Like, what's the problem?
But have you painted religious? I mean, that's actually another thing.
Yes, sorry, yes, I did. Well, my training was super traditional and involved copying old masters and going to cathedrals and learning how to make paint in the same way as the old masters did. And when we did these 3 years of rigorous training, which involved literally egg tempera, fresco, the whole lot. And they took us to Florence. We lived in a sort of monastery with these Franciscan monks while we were going to Santa Croce and all of that. And so, yeah, we were steeped in that. And year 4, we were given we had the same studio, but we're now allowed to do whatever we wanted, you know. And you'd think that's the point where I went, you know, super contemporary. But no, my first painting was a crucifixion. And we had this
I still have
life
it
model.
somewhere.
I've got it somewhere. Yeah, we had this life model called Ian, was part-time life model and part-time one of the hanged or the starving man at the London dungeon.
Oh my God.
And
So
he was a live, like, spooky guy in the London dungeon, and he was Russian, you know, old school life model who could hold a pose for hours. And I had him hanging on this pole and drew him, you know, I think it might have taken me about a month. And this guy was just hanging on this pole for the whole time. And I remember the sinews, and his feet had to dangle, you know, so he couldn't have any weight on his feet. So he really committed to this job. And I did exhibit it in London in Brick Lane. It wasn't exactly the thing that the market was looking for at the time.
it might be looking for it now. I'm no, but I think, I mean, actually one of the things that I find interesting is that while, you know, religion and spirituality are almost anathema in, you know, kind of in the Western art schools that are religion and, you know, the concept of God is still like across Africa is, you know, and when you speak to artists on the continent, is completely normal. It's not seen as something foreign, and which is, and I think that's kind of like that's a very in whatever shape or form, the sense of, you know, connection to spirituality is not seen as something
Weird.
either to be looked down upon or something less. And I think this is.
I wonder if that's shifting, though. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. I wonder if is a kind of dead end in terms of Western, you know, how as art becomes more and more of a commodity and becomes more and more of a sort of tradable money object, I can see kind of parallel shifts in the Western kind of contemporary art world where there's this even artists like Hilma af Klint, you know, who was unknown for so many years and is now this super important artist. And all of her work they're basically spiritual diagrams, you know, they're not even intended as artist paintings per se. These are diagrams to help you attain enlightenment. And that seems more and more mainstream. I don't think that would have happened 20 years ago.
Well, no, I mean, I agreed, but it's just that the shift is, you know, because we've dispensed with art critics in the art, like as a discipline, or, you know, and the idea of judgment has been decimated in practice. You know, we don't, you know, there isn't a sense of authority to say this is a point at which things move and this is what it is.
Sure.
And I think it's something, you know, this can be for another conversation.
That's another good one, yeah.
That's another good, you know, whatever happened to art criticism. And also, you know, to get back to before we started about the idea of AI and the idea of the difference between, you know, art as an object and art as an object that has been transformed through interaction with something spiritual and something creative. And I don't think the over intellectualized approach to art is able to sustain the kind of the conversation with AI in a way that, you know, because it has to be rational, and rationality would say that this is, you know, it's a product of something else, whereas, you know, whereas we can, because it is, you know, because there's something bigger at play.
Yeah, it's irrational on the kind of base level, and it only makes sense as you elevate into a kind of more into the layers where meaning exists, you know. It just occurred to me with something like a crucifixion or a pieta, you know, these images that have been repeated by different artists through time. There is a kind of measurement system, you know, because there's so much. You know, I remember when you do take on a subject like that, you suddenly in the room with Goya and Titian and Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Craigie Aitchison, you know, in like contemporary Salvador Dali, et cetera, et cetera. And so even if you think if you've jettisoned critique and critics and judgment, you still have that inner, you've got a pretty clear comparison. Like your crucifixion is pretty average. You know?
It's accountability. It's actually, you know, and I think that's what, you know, one of the indispensable elements of art is accountability to art history. You know, that's kind of, at least in my definition of the word.
The thing I should add about that beautiful series is that if you now have to go and watch The Great Beauty,